Hello everyone, and welcome to the Impact Emissions Inventory Guidance video. My name is Mark Gilbert. I work in the Emissions Inventory section of the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, and today we will be talking about how to manually enter and submit a emissions inventory within an impact profile. So first we'll go over some of the contacts. The Air Emissions Supervisor is Tyler Ward, and then the program principals for our group are myself, Mark Gilbert, and Ryan Beavers. And then we have Nathan McNamara, who's the Emissions Inventory and Smoke Management Analyst. So if you have any emissions inventory related questions, please reach out to one of us. And then if you have any technical impact questions, please email the deq-air-impact@wyo.gov email address. So now let's log into an impact profile in order to create an emissions inventory. So first you'll go to the Shared Chrome Air Services website and log in using your credentials. If you don't have any and your company doesn't have any, please reach out to the impact team to get this set up. So I will log in with my username and password. And here you can see my current company, which is just a placeholder facility under Wyoming, and my role is listed as a certifier. So there are two types of roles that you can have with an impact as a company, and that is a preparer and a certifier. So the difference between the two is the preparer can prepare any kind of reports within impact. They just can't submit anything. So the certifier can prepare and submit. So if you are a certifier, you can submit everything, and if you're a preparer, you can only, like it in the name, prepare the stuff. So we'll click on this company here, and we'll go to Visit. All right, and I only have one facility that I'm associated with, so some of you may see numerous facilities here, but we will choose this facility here, which is the EI demonstration facility. And so now this is my home screen, and as you can see, there's only one tab in the top right corner here, and that's Impact Home. So the first thing we'll do is create an emissions inventory. So we'll go down to this button right here and click Create Emissions Inventory. And then we'll pick a reporting year, and so for the 2023 triennial, you'll obviously want to pick 2023, but for this example, we'll do 2022. So click 2022, and then the contact type, annual or winter, we'll do annual. And then you're given the option to copy data from an existing emissions inventory. So you can copy a previous year's inventory, and we highly recommend this. It makes it a lot quicker because everything from the previous year will be copied over. So for this example, we'll choose 2021 since that was the previous year. All right, and now you can see that there are three menus up here, and so there are three tasks associated with the emissions inventory. There's the facility contact change, the facility inventory change, and then the emissions inventory itself. So first we'll go through the facility contact change. So looking at this list here, you can see that there are two levels. There is the facility contacts and the all company contacts. So the facility contacts are the contacts that are specifically associated with this facility. So right now it is just myself as the environmental contact. Then down below, these are all of the contacts that are associated with the specific company, and the company name being Wyoming AQD. And when looking at current contacts for a facility, we look to see that there is no end date here. So as long as there's no end date, you are a current contact for the facility. So if you need to time out or remove a contact, you can click on that specific contact under the facility contact table. So I'll click on the brown hyperlink here under contact type. Then I can click edit contact type, and I can change this to have an end date. So whichever date they no longer were working with the company, you can put that in here, and then click save. So this will time them out, but that leaves no contact, so we would also want to assign a contact for this facility. So we can go down to right here and click assign contact type, and say we want another environmental contact. We can choose from the contacts in the table below here, and then we'll do a start date. So we could do 1/1/2023, and then click save. And this will include a new contact within the facility contacts. If there is a new contact that is not in this table below that you would like to assign to this facility, you can scroll down to the bottom and click Create Contact Person. So this will pop up a window, and all the required fields will have asterisks next to them, and so you can put in any of that information and then click Create Contact. And then once you're done with all the contact changes, you can go down to the bottom and press Submit. I will note that these tasks, the facility contact change and facility inventory change, are tied to the emissions inventory tasks. So if you do not submit these, when you submit the emissions inventory task, it will submit these two automatically. But I'll go ahead and go to the bottom and submit. Then it'll have a pop-up window asking you if you want to submit these changes, and click Yes. And then it will require your password. And also a security question. All right, and submit task completed successfully. So now we'll go to the facility inventory change. So this is the first level of the facility, and as you can see, it has the facility name, description, and some of the parameters for the facility. And this one also has the APIs that are associated with it. So if you need to change anything in the top level here, you can scroll down to the bottom, click Edit, and then make any of the necessary changes. And then when you're done, go back to the bottom and click Save. Now if you want to change the location data, you do not need to scroll down to the bottom because there is a link here. So you click on the brown hyperlink, and then you can click Edit and make any necessary changes to the facility location. So now we will go over the facility tree. So as you see here on the left, these are all of the emission units that are associated with the facility. The shutdown ones are below. All these above could be operating or not yet installed. So we will expand this. When you click this button, you can see the branches of this tree, and for each emission unit, there's the emission unit itself, a process, and a release point. So first, we'll just go down to the glycol dehydrator. So that will be DHY001. And as you can see here on this top portion, from here up, this is the top data EU level, and this will be the same for all emission units. It'll be there's an AQD description, the company equipment ID, and then the company equipment description. So the company is able to fill out this area here and this, and update the operating status if necessary. If a emission unit was temporarily shut down during the reporting period for the emissions inventory, please do not shut down the unit. Just indicate it within the emissions inventory that it did not operate. And so you can edit this by going to the bottom and updating these, along with the commencement of construction and initial operation. And then there's also this bottom level here, which is the EU or emission unit type specific information. These are different for each type of emission unit. So specifically for a dehydration unit, it's just going to be the type and the design capacity. So with any of the different types of units, please go through these parameters and make sure they're all accurate, and if any change needs to be made, just go ahead and edit them and save. If a unit is not yet installed, it will not show up within the emissions inventory, and if the initial operation or commencement is after the reporting period, it will also not show up in the emissions inventory. So for example, for the 2023 annual, when you are reporting on this, if there's an emission unit that started up on January 1st of 2024 and is listed as operating and impact, it will not show up within the emissions inventory. This is also the same for emission units that are permanently shut down. So if they're permanently shut down before the period starts, they will not show up within the EI. So now we will go on to the process level. And so this is where we indicate the SCC code for an emission unit. And the SCC code is what the EPA and the division uses to classify emissions. So this will define what the throughput units are going to be. And it will also allow for some of EPA's factors to be used. So the EPA may have emission factors for the specific SCC, so this will automatically be generated within the emissions inventory, and you have the opportunity to use them. So we'll go through that in a little bit once we get into the emissions inventory itself. So now let's move into control units. So there are two controls on this DHI. There's a condenser and a flare. So we'll just go to the flare and look at that. So these are important to have within the profile because the throughput method within the emissions inventory will leverage the control efficiencies for these. So as you can see in the top level here, describes the unit itself, which is a flare, and then the initial installation date and the operating status. So make sure all of these are correct. And then there are some other specific parameters for the flare that need to be populated as well if they're not. And there will be an asterisk next to the ones that need to have values. For example, here the ignition device and flame presence sensor and flare type are required. And then there is also the control efficiencies. So this is where the throughput-based method leverages numbers. As you can see, if there's a 98% control, there will be a 98% reduction in emissions for that throughput-based method. So there are three different numbers to put here. There's the design control efficiency, which is what the manufacturer states that the capture or the efficiency is of this flare. And then there is the operating control efficiency, which is for the specific site. It may be slightly different due to altitude or other variables at that site, but typically these two are around the same number. And then there is the capture efficiency, and this is the amount of pollutant that is getting routed through the control device. So typically this is at 100%. If it's a flare, we would assume that all of the gas that is routed from the DHI going to the flare goes through the flare. So this will result in a total efficiency of 98%. If you need to add any pollutants to this, it's very easy. Just go down to Edit, and we will click Add Pollutant. And we'll pick say NOx. Now, this is incorrect because the flare would not control the NOx from this unit. So we'll just put that in anyways for now, at 98, 98, and 100. And then you click Save, and it's been added. So in this example, NOx shouldn't have been added, so we're going to pretend like we accidentally added that and we need to remove it. Also very easy, just click Edit again, click on the checkbox for NOx, and then click Delete Selected Pollutant. Go back down and click Save. Now that pollutant is gone and it is just VOCs. Now let's move on to the release point, and that will be the last one on this chain here. And so there are three different types of release points. We have the vertical, horizontal, and fugitive. So for the vertical, it will require release point latitude and longitudes and some other parameters below. Typically, companies will use the same latitude and longitude for the facility, but if you have more accurate coordinates for that release point, please include those here. And then we'll also need a base elevation, stack height, stack diameter, exit velocity, and exit gas temperature for the vertical and the horizontal release points. For a fugitive, we don't need those. Fugitives won't have those parameters, so you can include the release point latitude and longitude, but it is not required, and none of the other specifics are below. Horizontal uses the same parameters as the vertical. So I will click Cancel, just to not save any of those changes. And then for the vertical and horizontal release points, there is also an exit gas flow rate. This is calculated assuming simplistic drag-free flow. Now let's say there is an emission unit that is missing from the profile or one that needs to be brought online. So if there's one that's missing, we'll go to the main facility page right here, and then go down, click Create Emission Unit. Then we'll go to Flare, say we need to add this flare, and I will just give it some generic parameters, say 1/1/. All right, and then we'll also need to add a process, so you can add your SCC code based on the previous flare. So we'll look at that one and see what it's got. We'll copy that, bring it to the second flare, and then we'll go Create Emissions Process. Now we've got that. Now let's add a release point. You can add your own release point, or you can also clone another one. So since we're going to assume this flare is very similar to flare 1, so we'll go to the vertical release point, we'll go down to the bottom, and then we'll copy the base elevation. So we have that, and we'll click Create Cloned Release Point. Add the base elevation, add the facility coordinates, and then we'll change this to FLR, and we'll click Save. Now going to expand the facility tree here, you can see that there is a disassociated release point. So this is the one that we need to add to flare 2. So we will go to flare 2, click under the process. Because this is a cascading flow, we want to be under the process when we associate it, and then we will associate existing release point. And that was vertical release point 13. All right, so now we've got it all set up here. So flares are interesting because they are both an emission unit and control piece of control equipment. So say that new flare is controlling tank 6, and we want to add it as a control of this tank. So first we will go to the process level, and you'll see that it has a release point associated with it. So we'll go to that release point first actually, and we'll check and see blowdown tank vent pipe. So since this tank is now controlled by a flare, it will have a different release point, so we will want to disassociate this release point. So we'll go to the process level to disassociate the release point from it, click vertical 12, and click save. So now we want to add this flare to the emission unit. So once again, since it's cascading, we'll want to go to the process level, and then we can click create and associate control equipment. If the control equipment already exists, we can associate existing control equipment. So I will click create and associate control equipment, and we will choose flare. Just add some generic parameters here. It is operating. We will say it is elevated and open. Ignition device, yes. All right. Now we'll also want to add that control efficiency for pollutants. So we'll add VOCs. And use the same parameters as the other flare. And as you can see, I forgot to put some of the parameters in, and it will let you know with an error message. So we'll go here and we'll say air assisted and thermocouple. All right. So now you can see it is an FLA instead of FLR. That is the control ID. So currently this isn't associated with the flare within the facility profile. So what we need to do is add the release point that we use for that flare 2 to this FLA 2. So we'll look at that, go down to flare 2, and see that it's vertical 13. So then we'll go back, scroll down to the tank, click on it, and then because it's cascading, we want to add the release point to the last thing on here, which is the flare. So we go down here and we click create or associate existing release point. Then we click the drop down menu and choose vertical 13. Alright, so now you can see the tank has the flare controls on it with the correct release points for flare 2. So now that we're done with the facility inventory changes, let's get into the actual emissions inventory itself. So we'll go to the top menu here, ribbon on the far right. So changes to the facility inventory will now show up within the emissions inventory itself. As you can see on the menu on the left here, that it only shows the emission unit and then the process associated with the emission unit. And then this here is the summary page, and it has a summary of all of the emissions by pollutant. So this is the combination of all emission units here. And we have PM, CO, NOx, SO2, VOCs, and ammonia in the criteria area. Ammonia is here due to some of the billing that is associated with Title V facilities. Some get billed on ammonia, so that's included. And then the lower portion is the hazardous air pollutants and greenhouse gases and other. These are only included down here if there is an EPA emission unit factor that's used or a factor that is manually input. Then below there is the attachment section. So this is where you would include any kind of supporting documentation. This includes calculations or manufacturer data. And for calculations, if they're done through Excel, please submit the Excel workbook itself and not a PDF of it. It makes it a lot easier for us to go through and QA everything and make sure it all looks good. So in order to add something here, you could just click Add, and then the attachment type will say calculations. And then you can put a description in here, say DHI 001 calcs. And then I'll just go and choose a file. So I'll just pick something random to put in here. And so there's an Excel sheet, click apply. And now that shows up down here below. And you can click on it and view it using the brown hyperlink here as well. Below that is the reason/explanation for emissions inventory revision. This only pops up when creating an emissions inventory that already exists in impact. So for this example, the 2022 annual already exists for this facility, so it is asking me why I'm making a new one, and you will not see this on a 2023 annual if it is your first submission. There's also an exclude/include emission units button at the bottom. This is a high-level approach to quickly disassociate or remove units or add units to the emissions inventory. For example, up here you can see the BVCs are currently listed as did not operate, and we click on them. So we can go down here and click the exclude/include emission units, and as you can see here, detailed reporting can be unchecked, and this will make it so that it did not operate. So if we want to do that, we click that, and then we need to select a choice for that, and it could be less than reporting or did not operate. So we want to choose, say, did not operate. For criteria pollutants, the threshold is 50 pounds. For hazardous air pollutants, the threshold is 10 pounds. If each criteria pollutant is below 50 pounds and each hazardous air pollutant is below 10 pounds, then the unit can be listed as less than reporting requirement. If one of the pollutants is above those levels, then all pollutants need to be reported for that unit. But this one did operate during the reporting period, so we'll leave it as is. And as you can see, this is one of 25 out of 26. So if you don't see the one you're looking for, just click the drop down. You can do show all or go to the next page. So we'll do show all. And you can see tank 6 at the bottom here. And so we agree with all the changes and we click save. Now we'll go to the emission unit level for one of the emission units. So we'll say DHI 1 again. So we'll click on the top portion of that, DHI 1. And as you can see, it's got a summary of the emissions for that specific emission unit, and then it also lists the reporting level, which is detailed emissions reporting. So this specific level, the only thing you can edit is the reporting level, and so just like in that previous feature, you can just select which one. So we'll leave it as is because there are detailed emissions reporting. So click save. And then we'll go to the process level. So this is where the emissions actually get added. So there are two levels to the process. There's the top portion, which is the material, schedule, and season. So this is where you'll put in the operating hours, the throughput, and any other possible variables that that specific SCC code for that emission unit may have. So those would pop over here. Examples may be sulfur content or silt content, depending on the SCC. So we can click edit, and we can update the numbers in here and here as well, and on this section as well. Typically those just are unchanged. So we'll click save. And then there's the lower portion here, which is the actual emissions. So we can edit emissions. And right now, this specific unit is using the emissions method for everything. So we will go through that one last. First, we will look at the time-based. So there are a few time-based. This is a time-based factor with a SEM control. And then there's a time-based factor for stack test and time-based factor estimate. So all of these kind of go in order of preference. Obviously, most facilities won't have SEMs and most don't have stack tests for their units. So if you do have a stack test, please use it. And if you have SEM data, please use that as well. So when you click on the time-based factor, we'll just do the estimate. It pops up a different field here. So you have hours uncontrolled, and then the uncontrolled emission factor, and then the time-based factor. So normally when using these get zeroed out, these two, and then you'll put a time-based factor, and then that will generate the total emissions based off the hours of operation. Then we have the throughput-based factor. So when you click on that one, it just has these two fields now. So for the throughput, typically what we'll do is just put 0 in the hours uncontrolled, and then the throughput-based factor. If there are controls associated with a unit, so for example this D-high has a flare, if you use the throughput-based factor, for example on VOCs down here, and there's 98% control, and we put 100 pounds per million cubic feet of gas as the factor, well, that will get reduced to 2 pounds because of the 98% reduction. So that will show up in the final numbers here. So if it is controlled and there are uncontrolled hours, you can include those here. So we could say 5 hours uncontrolled and the emission factor is 100. So what it would do is it would calculate 5 hours at the uncontrolled emission factor rate, and then the remaining hours at the uncontrolled, assuming the control efficiency on the flare. When using the throughput-based factor, there may also be EPA factors available. These are called webfire factors, and there are none for this D-high, so we will check another unit to see. Right, so we will go to one of the heaters. We'll select the process level for heater 3, and as you can see there are some available factors here. So this means there are webfire factors available. So it is currently using the emissions method, but we will change that real quick to the throughput-based factor. And as you can see, this factor pops up. And then we will also want to include 0 hours uncontrolled and click Save. So we have this factor here, which is a webfire factor, and we can also look at that by clicking on the method used, and you could click this emission one as well. But when we click the throughput-based factor, you can see under the factors section here, there is a included factor for CO, and there's a reference description as well if you want to look at that before choosing it. So these are included for your convenience. If you don't have factors available, you can use these. Alright, so we will go back to that D-high and look at some of the other methods. So other than the throughput-based factor, there is also the time-based factor allowable. This would be a limit from an NSR permit. So if you don't have any better available data, you can use this. And then finally, there is the emissions method. But before we get to that, let's go back to the time-based factor. If you're using an allowable one, please include an explanation of where that allowable limit comes from. So a permit number would suffice. And then there's the emissions method. So this one does not use any calculations whatsoever. You just add the total emissions to the correct field here. So if it is a vertical or horizontal release point, you'll use the stack. And if it is a fugitive or area release point, you'll use the fugitive. And with this, because there's no calculations, calcs must be provided either in the supplemental material at on the main menu or in the explanation field to the right here. And we don't recommend using this method because cloned emission inventories will not update the emissions based on the operating parameters. Up here they will be fixed numbers, so those will need to be manually updated as well. Now let's go to the hazardous air pollutant and greenhouse gas table below. So these operate pretty much the exact same way as the top tables. The only difference is there will only be factors included here if there's a web fire factor available or the pollutant was manually added. So because we cloned this from a previous emissions inventory, the units were moved forward from that one, but normally none of these would be here. So if you need to delete one, fairly easy. You can go down here, click select, and then click delete selected emissions. And then once you're done, you can click save. But looking at the methods, they're all the same, and these can all be removed if necessary, but if you have accurate data for any other pollutants, please add them here. So we can add another one, going down here, and you can scroll through the list, or you can just type in a pollutant and it will come up. And we'll choose the method, and since everything on this one is emissions, we'll use that. Once you have all the correct parameters in for all the emission units and the right emissions for all of the emission units, you can go back to the main level of the emissions inventory, which is this top section here, and then scroll down to the very bottom and say we got all the right attachments, all the emissions look good. We will click validate. And so as you can see, there are quite a few errors here, and we will go through some of them. The first one being no reason or explanation for the revisions. Like I said, this won't pop up if you're creating a new emissions inventory that's never been reported before. So we will fix that real quick, and then we will go on to the next ones. So looking at this error messages here, you can see that there are brown hyperlinks. So the nice thing is, for example, on this flare, we are missing SO2, NOx, CO, and hours. So we're missing a lot of things on flare 2. So we'll click on one of the hyperlinks, and it takes us right to the flare. So as you can see here, we just forgot to fill this one out. So common error, but we catch those so you can get those filled out, and I'll just put some dummy numbers in here. And then as you can see, we have the web fire factor here for this one. And then for the others, I'll just put in some generic numbers. Alright, so we have the throughput units, and that's based on the throughput here. Alright, so we made all of those changes. Let's see what other errors we had. So flare 2 and then tank 4. So we're missing some stuff on tank 4 as well. We click on that, go down, and also missing all the parameters on that one. So once again, we'll just fill that out. And like I said, these are just dummy numbers. So add your real numbers to these, and then you can also fill out the bottom portion before the top. I recommend filling out the top first. That's what we normally do. Alright, so that one is complete. And for the D-high, as you can see, since cadmium is a particulate matter cannot be 0. So we will click on that, and either make sure that the PM is equal to or greater than cadmium, or we'll just remove cadmium. And in this case, we're going to remove it. So go down, click cadmium, delete selected emissions, and save. So now that we have gone through all of the errors, let's try and validate again. Alright, So now we have that the SCC is currently not valid. So this is an example of the facility profile within the emissions inventory differing. So we will go here and just delete from the period report. All right, so now back to the main emission inventory summary menu here, and then we will click validate again. And now, as you can see, validation successful. There's a green check up here. But you must read this message that says your task has been validated but not submitted. Until a task has been submitted by a certifier, it is not visible to AQD. So we can't view any of this stuff that you're doing in here until it is submitted to us. So any of these changes have not gone through until this is completely submitted. So now we'll scroll to the bottom and click Submit. And make sure that you are authorized to submit if you're a certifier. And there will be another pop-up menu. Click Yes. And then enter my password. Try that again. All right. And then you'll have your security question. And then the task has been submitted. So, as you can see, the emissions inventory, facility inventory, and facility contact change tasks are gone. This means that the emissions inventory has been successfully submitted. This will conclude the Impact Emissions Inventory guidance video. If you have any remaining questions or concerns, please reach out to one of the contacts provided at the beginning of the video. And thanks for watching.